You've probably been told your entire life that aging is natural, that it's just something that happens slowly, quietly, over time. Your skin wrinkles, your energy fades, your body weakens, and the explanation always sounds simple: wear and tear, getting older, nothing you can do about it. But what if that's not the full story? What if aging is not just something that happens to you, but something that is happening inside you, actively, constantly, like a process that never turns off? And what if I told you that your body may be slowly damaging itself every single day without you ever feeling it? Not because something is wrong with you, but because something deep inside your biology has been triggered, a mechanism that was supposed to protect you, but over time begins to work against you. Inside your body, there is a structure that holds everything together. It supports your skin, your blood vessels, your organs. You've never felt it, you've never seen it, but it is quietly responsible for how well your body ages. And as the years go by, that structure begins to break down. Now, most people would assume that this breakdown is harmless, just another sign of time passing. But here's where it gets unsettling. Because those tiny fragments, those microscopic pieces left behind, they don't simply disappear. They stay. And once they are there, they begin to act like something else entirely, not harmless debris, but signals, triggers, almost like molecular shrapnel. And once that process begins, your immune system reacts, not calmly, not slowly, but as if your body is under attack. You don't feel it happening. That's the most dangerous part. Because if something inside your body was breaking loudly, you would react. If it caused immediate pain, you would pay attention. But this doesn't. This process is silent. It builds slowly, layer by layer, day after day. While everything on the surface still feels normal, you wake up. You go about your routine. You tell yourself you're just a little more tired than you used to be. Maybe your joints feel a bit stiffer. Maybe your skin doesn't bounce back the same way. Maybe your energy dips earlier in the day. Nothing alarming, nothing dramatic. Just small changes, the kind you ignore, the kind everyone tells you is just aging. But underneath those small changes, something much more serious may be happening. Because chronic inflammation doesn't stay in one place. It spreads. It affects your blood vessels, making them less flexible. It interferes with how your body handles sugar, pushing you toward insulin resistance. It disrupts how your cells produce energy, leaving you feeling drained even after rest. And over time, it begins to reshape your entire biology, not in a way you can see overnight, but in a way that accumulates, quietly, relentlessly. This is how people wake up one day and are told they have high blood pressure, even though they felt fine. This is how metabolic disease develops, without clear warning signs. This is how aging accelerates, not in years, but in systems. And here's what makes it even more unsettling. This process doesn't require a major event. It doesn't take a dramatic injury or a serious illness. It can be driven by something as simple as what you eat every day, how you sleep, how much stress your body carries, without ever fully releasing it. Which means this isn't something happening to other people. It could be happening inside you, right now, as you listen to this. And if that internal cycle has already started, it doesn't slow down on its own. For a long time, we believed that aging was simply the result of time, that your body, like a machine, slowly wears down. Parts weaken, structures break, and eventually, things stop working the way they used to. It sounds logical, but the more we study the human body, the more we realize that explanation is incomplete, because your body is not a passive system. It doesn't just wear out, it responds. It adapts. It reacts to signals constantly. And in many cases, what we call aging is not passive damage. It is an active biological process, one that is being driven from within. In recent years, researchers have started to focus on something that was often overlooked, a structure that exists in every tissue of your body, not inside your cells, but around them. It's called the extracellular matrix, or ECM. And if you've never heard of it before, that's not surprising, because you don't feel it, you don't see it, and yet it is everywhere. The ECM is what gives your body structure, It holds your skin firm. It keeps your blood vessels flexible. It supports your organs at a microscopic level. Proteins like collagen and elastin form this network. They act like a scaffold, a living framework that keeps everything in place. For years, we assumed that when this structure breaks down with age, it's simply part of the natural decline, nothing more than biological wear and tear. But that assumption is now being challenged, because scientists are beginning to see that when the ECM breaks down, it doesn't just disappear, it changes, and more importantly, it starts to send signals, signals that your body does not ignore, signals that your immune system reacts to. And that is where the story of aging begins to shift, from something passive to something active. For a long time, scientists believed that when the extracellular matrix breaks down, the fragments left behind were harmless, just debris, byproducts of aging that the body would eventually clear away. But that assumption turned out to be wrong, because those fragments don't just sit there. They don't remain inactive. They interact, they communicate, and in some cases, they trigger. These tiny pieces, broken down from collagen, elastin, and other structural proteins, are now known as matricines, and their behavior is anything but passive. Instead of being ignored by the body, they are recognized, almost as if they were signals of damage, or worse, signals of danger. When these fragments accumulate, your immune system doesn't treat them like neutral waste. It reacts to them. It interprets them as a sign that something is wrong, that the tissue has been compromised, and once that signal is detected, an inflammatory response begins, not because there is an infection, not because there is an external threat, but because your body believes there is. This is the twist that changes everything. Because now, aging is no longer just about structures weakening over time. It becomes a process where the breakdown itself feeds into something much larger, a feedback signal, a trigger, a biological alarm that keeps getting activated over and over again. And once that alarm starts ringing, it doesn't easily turn off. To understand why this matters so much, you need to picture what the extracellular matrix actually does. Think of it as the hidden architecture of your body, not the visible parts like muscles or bones, but the invisible framework that holds everything together. Every cell in your body doesn't just float freely, it is anchored, supported, surrounded by this complex network made of proteins like collagen and elastin. Collagen gives strength, elastin gives flexibility. Together, they create a system that allows your skin to stretch and return, your blood vessels to expand and contract, your tissues to absorb stress without falling apart. When you are young, this system is constantly being repaired. Old fibers break down, new ones are built. It's a balanced cycle. Damage happens, but it is quickly resolved. Now, over time, that balance starts to shift. The rate of breakdown increases, the rate of repair slows down, and gradually, the structure begins to weaken. But again, the problem is not just that it weakens. The real issue is what happens next. When collagen and elastin fibers break, they don't dissolve instantly. They fragment. They break into smaller and smaller pieces, and these fragments begin to accumulate in the surrounding tissue. At first, this seems insignificant. After all, your body deals with waste all the time. But these fragments are different because they are not random. They carry information. They still retain parts of their original structure, patterns that your immune system recognizes, and that recognition changes everything. Because your immune system is designed to respond to patterns like this, not just from bacteria or viruses, but from damaged tissue. So when these fragments build up, your body doesn't stay neutral, it reacts. It activates immune cells, it releases signaling molecules, it begins a process that, in a healthy situation, would help repair damage. But here's the problem. In aging tissue, that signal doesn't stop, and among all the components of this system, one stands out more than the others. Elastin. This is the protein that allows your tissues to stretch and then return to their original shape. It's what keeps your arteries flexible, what allows your lungs to expand and contract, what gives your skin that youthful resilience. But elastin has one critical limitation. Unlike many other proteins in your body, it is not easily replaced. In fact, much of the elastin you rely on as an adult was produced early in your life, which means when it breaks down, your body struggles to rebuild it, and as elastin fibers degrade over time, they release specific fragments that researchers have found to be particularly active. particularly inflammatory. These elastin-derived fragments don't just sit in the tissue, they interact directly with immune cells. They bind to receptors. They send signals, and those signals tell your body something very specific: that damage is occurring, that the structure is compromised, that a response is needed. So your immune system responds. It increases inflammatory signaling, it recruits more immune cells to the area, it shifts the local environment into a state of alert. Now, in the short term, this kind of response can be helpful. It's how your body repairs injury. But when these signals persist, when elastin continues to break down, when fragments continue to accumulate, that response no longer turns off, it becomes chronic. And this is where we begin to see the deeper connection. Because chronic inflammation is not just a side effect of aging, it is a driver. It influences how your body stores fat, how it regulates blood sugar, how your cells produce and use energy. This is why elastin fragmentation has been linked to conditions like obesity, metabolic dysfunction, and systemic inflammation, not as separate problems, but as part of the same underlying process, a process that starts quietly at the structural level and then spreads outward into every system of the body. And once that process is in motion, it begins to feed on itself. Once this process begins, it doesn't move in a straight line. It becomes a loop, a cycle that feeds itself. And the more it repeats, the harder it is to stop. It starts with inflammation, triggered by those fragments, the breakdown of your own tissue. Your immune system reacts, it releases inflammatory signals, it prepares for repair. But that inflammation doesn't just stay contained, because inflammation itself causes damage. It weakens surrounding tissue. It accelerates the breakdown of collagen and elastin. It creates more structural stress. And as that structure breaks further, it produces even more fragments, more signals, more triggers, which leads to more inflammation. And the cycle continues. Inflammation leads to tissue breakdown, which creates fragments, which trigger more inflammation. Again, and again, and again. Each time the loop runs, it reinforces itself, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, until the baseline of your body changes. What used to be a temporary response becomes a constant state, low grade, chronic, always there. And this is where aging accelerates, because your body is no longer just responding to damage. It is generating it from within. This is why the effects show up everywhere. Your skin loses elasticity, not just from time, but from repeated inflammatory damage. Your blood vessels stiffen, not just from age, but from chronic signaling that never turns off. Your metabolism shifts, not just from lifestyle, but from a system that is constantly under stress. And the most dangerous part? You don't feel the loop. There is no alarm, no clear moment where everything changes, just a slow drift, a gradual decline that feels normal. Until one day the accumulation becomes visible. A diagnosis, a symptom, a limitation that wasn't there before. But by then, the loop has been running for years. And unless something interrupts it, it will continue to run. What makes this even more concerning is that this loop doesn't stay isolated. It doesn't just affect one tissue or one part of your body. It spreads. Because inflammation is not local. It travels through your bloodstream. It influences systems that, on the surface, seem completely unrelated. Take your metabolism, for example. When this low-grade inflammation becomes persistent, it begins to interfere with how your body processes energy. Your cells become less responsive to insulin. Glucose stays in your bloodstream longer than it should. And over time, your body compensates by producing more insulin just to keep things stable. But that compensation comes at a cost, because constantly elevated insulin pushes your body toward fat storage, especially around the abdomen. This is how metabolic dysfunction begins, not suddenly, but gradually, driven by signals you never notice. Now, consider your energy levels. Mitochondria, the parts of your cells responsible for producing energy, are highly sensitive to inflammation. When inflammatory signals remain elevated, mitochondrial function becomes less efficient. Your cells produce less energy, even when nothing seems obviously wrong, which is why you may feel tired without a clear reason. You sleep, you rest, but your energy doesn't fully return. And then there's your cardiovascular system. Your blood vessels rely on elasticity to function properly, but chronic inflammation alters that structure. It reduces flexibility. It affects how vessels expand and contract. Over time, this contributes to increased pressure within the system. And again, this doesn't happen overnight. It builds quietly, system by system, layer by layer. This is why conditions like obesity, insulin resistance, and cardiovascular disease are so often connected, not because they are separate problems that happen to occur together, but because they share the same underlying driver, a chronic inflammatory state that started much earlier, at a level you could not see. And once that connection is understood, everything begins to look different, because what you once thought were isolated issues are actually part of the same process. But here's where things begin to shift, because once you understand that aging is driven, at least in part, by this inflammatory loop, a new question naturally follows. If the process can be triggered, can it also be interrupted? This is exactly what researchers have started to explore. Instead of treating aging as something inevitable, they are looking at it as something that might be modifiable, something that can be slowed, or at least influenced. One of the areas of focus has been the enzymes that amplify this inflammatory response, the molecules that help sustain the signal once it begins. And in that context, scientists have identified a compound known as DANA. In experimental settings, DANA has been shown to inhibit an enzyme called neuraminidase, an enzyme involved in cellular signaling and inflammatory processes. By blocking this pathway, the inflammatory response appears to decrease, not completely, but significantly. And in animal studies, this shift has led to measurable changes: reduced inflammation, improved metabolic function, and in some cases, an increase in lifespan. In one study, lifespan was extended by approximately 17%. Now, it's important to be clear about what this means. This is not a cure. It is not a drug you can take today. And it does not reverse aging. These findings are still early, mostly limited to laboratory and animal models. But they point to something important, that this loop, this cycle of inflammation and tissue breakdown, is not fixed. It can be influenced. And that changes the entire conversation. Because for the first time, we are not just observing aging. We are beginning to understand how to intervene in it. At this point, something important begins to shift in how you see your own body. Because if you've been following closely, then aging is no longer just about time. It's not just about the number of years that have passed. It's about what has been happening inside those years, repeatedly, quietly, systematically. Aging in this context is not a passive decline. It is the result of signals that trigger inflammation, signals that tell your body something is wrong, even when there is no immediate danger. And when those signals repeat, the response repeats, over and over again, which means what you experience as aging may actually be the accumulation of thousands, even millions of small inflammatory events, each one subtle, each one barely noticeable, but together, powerful. This reframes everything, because it suggests that you are not simply getting older, you are being shaped by a process that can accelerate or slow down, depending on the signals your body receives. And those signals are not random. They come from your environment, your habits, your daily inputs, what you eat, how you sleep, how your body handles stress. All of these influence whether that loop continues to run or begins to quiet down. So the question is no longer, how do I stop aging? Because that's not realistic. The question becomes, how do I reduce the signals that keep this process active? And once you start asking that question, you begin to see aging differently, not as something you are powerless against, but as something you can influence from the inside out. Right now, as you sit here listening to this process may already be happening inside your body, not in a dramatic way, not in a way you can feel clearly, but in small, subtle signals that repeat throughout the day, after a meal that spikes your blood sugar, after a night of poor sleep, after hours of stress your body never fully recovers from. Those signals accumulate, and each time they do, they feed into that same loop. You may not notice it at first, because nothing feels urgent, nothing feels broken, you can still function, you can still go about your day. But there are signs, small ones, easy to dismiss. You feel more tired than you used to, even when you sleep enough. Your body doesn't recover as quickly, your energy fluctuates, your focus drifts, your skin changes, not overnight, but gradually. And because the change is slow, it feels normal, it feels expected. But what if those changes are not just age? What if they are the visible edge of something much deeper? Because by the time you can see or feel the effects clearly, the process has already been running for a long time, quietly shaping how your body functions. And this is why most people don't act early. Not because they don't care, but because nothing forces them to. There's no sharp warning, no immediate consequence, just a slow shift. Until one day, something feels different enough to notice. And by then, the loop is already well established. So if this process is being driven from within, the next question becomes unavoidable. Where are these signals coming from? Because they don't appear out of nowhere. They are not random. They are being generated continuously by the way you live. And when you break it down, most of that inflammatory pressure comes from just a few core sources. The first is sugar, not just obvious sugar, but the constant intake of refined carbohydrates that quickly turn into glucose in your bloodstream. Every time your blood sugar spikes sharply, your body responds. Insulin rises, inflammatory pathways activate, oxidative stress increases. And while your body can handle this occasionally, it was never designed to deal with it constantly, day after day, meal after meal. The second source is processed food. Food that has been altered, packaged, stabilized, and engineered for convenience. These foods often contain additives, degraded fats, and compounds that your body does not fully recognize as natural. Body encounters something it doesn't fully understand. It reacts defensively. Low-grade inflammation becomes part of the response, not because the food is toxic in a dramatic sense, but because it is biologically unfamiliar. The third, and often overlooked, is the imbalance of fats, specifically the excess of omega-6 fatty acids relative to omega-3. Industrial oils, like soybean oil, sunflower oil, corn oil, are now present in a large portion of modern diets. And while omega-6 fats are not inherently harmful, in excess, they shift your body toward a more inflammatory state. At the same time, omega-3, which helps regulate and calm inflammation, is often too low. And that imbalance matters, because your body depends on that ratio to maintain stability. So when you look at these three factors together, something becomes very clear. This isn't about one bad meal, or one unhealthy choice. This is about patterns, repeated inputs, signals that your body receives every single day and responds to every single time, which means the inflammatory loop we've been talking about is not just happening on its own. In many cases, it is being fueled. So if the problem is driven by repeated signals, then the solution isn't complicated. You don't need something extreme. You don't need something perfect. You need something consistent, because the goal is not to eliminate inflammation completely. That's impossible. The goal is to reduce the signals that keep triggering it over and over again. And that starts with how you structure your daily inputs. A simple way to think about it is this. Every meal is an opportunity to either increase that inflammatory pressure or reduce it. So instead of focusing on individual foods, focus on balance. A practical structure looks like this. Roughly half of your plate comes from vegetables, not because they are low calorie, but because they provide compounds that help regulate inflammation, antioxidants, polyphenols, minerals your body relies on to maintain stability. Then about a quarter of your meal comes from protein, eggs, fish, meat that is minimally processed. Protein supports repair. It helps your body maintain and rebuild tissue, including the structures we talked about earlier. The remaining portion comes from fats, but not just any fats. Fats that help restore balance. Sources like fatty fish, olive oil, nuts, and seeds. These provide omega-3 and other compounds that actively help calm inflammatory signaling. And then there's what you reduce, not necessarily eliminate overnight, but consciously bring down. Refined sugar, highly processed foods, excess industrial oils, because adding healthy foods on top of a system that is still overloaded with inflammatory inputs doesn't solve the problem, it just masks it. So if you remember only a few things, let it be this. Reduce what triggers inflammation, increase what helps regulate it, and repeat that pattern consistently. Because over time, those small shifts begin to change the signals your body receives. And when the signals change, the process begins to change with them. Now, it's important to pause here for a moment, because when people hear this, they often jump to extremes. They start looking for a single solution, a supplement, a shortcut, something that can fix the problem quickly. But that's not how this works. There is no single food, no single compound, no single change that can completely stop aging. And anyone who tells you otherwise is oversimplifying a very complex process, because what we're talking about here is not one pathway. It's a network, a system that involves your metabolism, your immune response, your environment, and your daily habits, all interacting over time, which means the goal is not perfection, it's direction. You are not trying to eliminate every source of inflammation. That's not realistic. You are trying to reduce the overall load, to shift the balance, to move your body out of a constant state of activation into a state where it has space to recover. And that doesn't happen overnight, it happens gradually, through repeated choices, small adjustments that over time begin to change how your body responds. So no, this is not a quick fix, but it is something far more powerful, because it is something you can influence every single day. Your body is not working against you, it never has. Every signal we've talked about, every response, every reaction, is your body trying to protect you, trying to adapt, trying to survive in the environment it has been given. The inflammation, the changes, the gradual decline. These are not acts of failure, they are responses to signals that have been repeated day after day for years. And when you begin to see it that way, something shifts, because it means your body is not broken. It is responding exactly as it was designed to, which also means something else. If the signals change, the response can change, not instantly, not perfectly. Gradually, just like the process that created the problem in the first place. You don't have to reverse everything. You don't have to fix years overnight. You just have to start changing the pattern. One decision at a time, one meal, one habit, one small shift that by itself may not feel significant, but over time becomes part of a different direction. Because aging is not just something that happens to you. It is something shaped by what your body experiences every single day. And while you may not control everything, you do control more than you think, and that may be the most important realization of all. If this made you think differently about your own health, even just a little, take a moment and share it with someone you care about. Because most people don't realize what's happening until much later, and sometimes, hearing the right idea at the right time can change that. If you've experienced any of the signs we talked about, low energy, slow recovery, changes that didn't make sense, I'd like to hear from you. Leave a comment below. And if you want more content like this, simple explanations that help you understand what's really happening inside your body, make sure to subscribe and stay connected. Because the more you understand, the more control you have,